Good morning. How's everyone today? I see some familiar faces. My name is John Vane Chuckle, and I was previously with the Controller's Office and the Initiative Manager for the Finance Initiative, and I have now joined the CalPlanning team 100%. So it's nice to see some familiar faces. And I'm curious where we're starting off today. Since this is an introduction, don't be shy. Has anyone in the room, raise your hand if you haven't heard anything about CalPlanning and you're just looking forward to hearing even what is this and how is it going to relate to my life? Anyone in the room who's at least heard what it is and has a sense? Maybe anyone who went to the web page? Excellent. Okay, good. So we have a nice balance. This is an introduction, so we will go through a lot of different items. But wanted to talk briefly. In my role, I'm in a lot of different rooms, and I hear in some rooms, CalPlanning, that's a central tool, doesn't really relate to me. I go to other rooms, and they say, you know, CalPlanning, that's for the schools and colleges, doesn't really relate to me. The good news is they're both right. CalPlanning is for Central and CalPlanning is for the schools and colleges. And what's so important about this tool is we can configure it to work for our business and our business needs. And that's why we have mounted a very large effort to bring in the entire campus to make this tool really work for us to meet our business needs. So I'm really excited about it. I was excited enough to leave my position and go on the team 100%. I think this is going to change how we manage financial management on campus. I'm going to give you a quick little overview of what is this team that I'm talking about, and this will be helpful as you guys move through the process of launching and knowing who to contact and who's around. So if we could go to the next slide. There we go. So I want to introduce the project team today. Kathy Lloyd is our fearless project manager. Kathy, if you could wave to everyone. We also have Kristen Rose, who's the lead of our change management. Myself, they call me the central budget implementation lead, and I'll talk about that in a minute on the next slide. Our presenter today is Todd over there. And our unit portfolio managers, these are the main people that we should be contacting. They are specifically going out and meeting with everyone across campus. So we have Eileen Foster over there from that. Have I missed anyone on our team? And our sponsors, Aaron Gore, and we have a new interim member of the team and of the budget office. So Laurent Heller from the law school has joined on the project and is taking the interim role of budget director. So what does a central business implementation leader do? This is my favorite role because I like to sit in the middle. I love Venn diagrams. I love diagrams. You guys will get that by the time we get to the fourth session. But my role is really the liaison between the project, the central budget office, the controller's office, and it's really to look at all the things that are around the implementation of the tool itself. So looking at business process, how does the chart of our accounts affect or work and function in the tool as well as in our daily lives in business? How are we structured? Are we structured for reporting to make reporting easier? And does it have a logical sense? Does it allow us to manage security? Does it allow us to see how our organization looks? We're also going to make some changes to the transfer process, and we're looking at transitioning the perm budge and the temp budge into an operating budget. And so we'll talk about all those. How does that relate to what I do today? How does it change in the tool? So I'm working on those projects in relationship to the overall implementation of the tool. So any questions before we jump into talking more specifically about CalPlanning, introducing it to you all? Great. Todd, it's all yours.
Thank you, John. Appreciate the introduction. Once again, my name is Todd Weinstein. I am one of the unit portfolio managers on CalPlanning, and I'll be walking you through the rest of the presentation for this morning. Feel free to raise your hands if you have questions throughout the presentation, and try to speak loudly so the microphones can capture your questions if possible. So for today's session, it's very high level, introductory. As we get through this session and we go on to further sessions, we'll show you more details about what the tool will look like and how the process is changing as John described. So for today's session, we'll talk about the objectives, key concepts and terminology, introduce you to some of the things that we're starting to think about, provide some background information on the project and what is the tool, talk about the roles of the planners and the local implementation managers. So we call them LIMs affectionately. They're LIM, local implementation managers. I see a few of them in the room today, so thank you for joining us. And then we'll talk about the timeline for this project and then wrap up with next steps. So we've been receiving many questions about specific areas that John touched on, and many of these areas will be covered in future sessions. So I just want to touch on some of the items on the right-hand side that will be happening in future sessions. The budget process redesign, how will the all funds budget process look in the future state? Variance analysis and forecasting. Currently this is done differently and consistently necessarily across the units at Berkeley. So we're going to create some reports that show variance analysis and forecasting, and hopefully we can become a little more consistent across units in how we do these processes. Budget transfer modifications, sign flipping, what is the difference between CalPlanning and BFS? They'll be a little bit different between those two systems. Chart of accounts rationalization, if the chart is changing, how is it changing, why is it changing? More details will be coming on that. The term and perm budge mapping. Relationships between CalPlanning and local systems, and then lastly, reports today versus reports tomorrow. How are they different? What is the function of each report, and how do we expect they'll be used? There will be 4 sessions. The topics will be slated into those sessions depending on how we make progress on the decisions for those. This is the high-level timeline of when they'll be occurring. We'll continue to use the UC Learning Center as you signed up for today's session to sign up for the future sessions, and we'll send out emails as the dates and times become set. So moving into the next section, key concepts and terminology. Since we're talking about budgeting, we thought it'd be good to revisit what are the objectives of budgeting at UC Berkeley. So we're working with a steering committee associated with our project and also our executive sponsors to come up with the high-level objectives of budgeting. So we've come up with 4: aligning financial resources to strategy, transparency, performance measures, and controls. So I'll provide a bit of detail about each of these topics. First, thinking about your budget. Your budget is really your financial plan. How are you going to achieve your strategy and goals? And that's the crux of how will you meet that in the future? And that's one of the core objectives of budgeting. Along those lines, it's thinking about all your revenue streams and how will you apply those revenue streams to meet your specific strategy. In terms of transparency, it provides a mechanism for communicating your budget decisions. And if we can create a more consistent approach across units, this is something that we're hearing from the deans is, how does my unit compare to other units? And if I have a different report than a different unit, what does this number mean versus this number? So really trying to create a consistent approach will improve the transparency. The other thing to note is within the unit, between units, and then additional stakeholders. So you may have additional stakeholders. For example, I know the Berkeley Art Museum has some outside stakeholders that they have some reporting requirements. So if we can create some consistent reports, I think it'll be helpful for that as well. Performance measures, so I touched on the variance analysis earlier, really comparing my budget to my actuals. How am I doing 6 months through the year, 9 months through the year? Or do I need to adjust anything for the remainder of the year to make sure I hit my goals for that specific year? And then lastly, controls. So this is your deficit prevention, making sure you're not spending more than you're bringing in. I'll pause and see if there are any questions or comments on the objectives. Okay. This slide talks about budgeting methodologies. So we went through and did current state meetings with each unit across campus. So we sat down and talked about how do you budget now and where do you think budgeting may go in the future? And one of the things we learned that there are really 2 methodologies of budgeting that we found, the incremental approach and the all funds approach. Thinking about incremental budgeting, this is really, you take what you're doing this year, you add a percentage or subtract a percentage and move forward. You kind of assume the activities and methods will work the same way that they do currently. You may make some minor changes, but generally you're just adding or subtracting a percentage. Pretty straightforward budgeting approach. On the right-hand side, we have the all funds budgeting approach. And this is the direction that leadership is pushing us to move towards. So looking at all your revenue streams, all your expenses, and really trying to understand which revenues are applied to which expenses and evaluating that holistically. So really saying, I did this last year, should I continue doing this year? Do I want to grow this? Do I want to wind this down? So being a little more holistic and strategic about how you're spending your money in the following year. And then a few more details about the objectives more specifically of all funds budgeting. So we talked about objectives of budgeting at a high level. This slide talks a little more specifically about all funds budgeting objectives. It provides a greater focus on making your priority decisions. So as you do that strategic evaluation of everything you're doing, you have a chance to think about how this aligns with your strategy. It allows leadership a chance to more holistically review their decisions. Improves your understanding of all your revenue sources and how they support your school. So as you think about your all funds budget, you see which revenue sources are growing, which ones are declining, and how does that support where you want to take your school or unit or division. And then lastly, the strategic and transparent process for those choices. Okay. So moving into a little bit more background information on the project. What is CalPlanning? So it sounds like from the hands that were raised, most of you are familiar with CalPlanning at a very high level. I'll provide a little bit of details and background about what we think CalPlanning is. So it's building a common enterprise framework for preparing, analyzing, and assessing your annual budget. So hopefully we can move the entire institution onto the same tool for creating and analyzing their budget. It will automate and streamline the budget and planning process. Some of the ways that we'll do this is it improves the consolidation effort. Currently, the budgets are submitted to the central office via Excel spreadsheets. They're manually consolidated to get a view of the entire institution. And that same process is happening at the unit level. As the departments are creating their budgets in Excel, they're usually submitted up, and then there's a manual process of consolidation. So we're going to improve and automate the consolidation process of the budget. This also takes out a lot of the errors when you're trying to link spreadsheets and add this sheet plus this sheet plus this sheet, what version am I on? So the quality of the data in the budget should also be improved. And lastly, shifting the effort of the finance professionals into more analysis and decision support. So as we take away the low value add activities of consolidation and adding things together, you have more time to think about the strategic decisions that we want you to think about. How do I want to spend my money next year? Instead of how do I get this number to add to this number and get the right version. Yep. Sure. Absolutely.
And I think that the Hyperion, oh, thank you. I think the Hyperion tool will do some of this, but based on your slide, the issue with budgets, there's always a two-part, from my perspective, a two-part piece with budgets. It's providing the information up the administrative chain at the campus, but also utilizing the budget effectively at the department level.
Absolutely.
And here what you're talking about, it primarily is building the budget at the campus level. And sometimes in the process of giving those folks what they need to be able to manage the overall campus budget, you take away from the individual departments what they need to be able to manage their day-to-day operations. And so I'm hoping that we're going to be going into what the Hyperion tool eventually will do at the department level as well?
Yes. Yes. So we've been meeting with each unit across campus to understand how their process works. So we're trying to engage and get as many requirements from all across campus to improve the process at the local level in addition to the process at the university-wide level. And as we design reports and talk about the reporting tools, there are a lot of flexibility and drill-down capabilities and iterative processes that we're going through to create and gather the requirements to meet the needs of the campus and of the units. The tool will provide a web-enabled automated fashion to enter data. So as you talk about the specific departments, they'll go into the web, they'll enter their data, and that will be consolidated for the units, and then in addition at the university level. The tool is a familiar Excel-like spreadsheet, so it's a grid. It's going to be quite familiar for you once you get into the tool. There are interactive and dynamic tools for reporting. We'll show you a screenshot of what it looks like today, and then we'll also, at future sessions, show you what the real reports look like. And then lastly, reporting capabilities are for analyzing and understanding the budget. And I think the end of this one is quite important, comparing your prior year, current year, future years with your actual values. So the tool will help bring in your closed periods from prior years and prior months and compare it to your budget for that specific year. So This slide shows that we know there's a lot going on campus right now. OE has several projects underway. Enterprise Data Warehouse, Bear-by, Shared Services, IT Common Good Funding model, and the new financial model. We're working with the OE office to try and smooth the workload as much as possible, since we know many of the same people are affected by each of these initiatives. We've recently undergone a heat map exercise to say who are we affecting and at what point in time are we affecting them. And the other initiatives are going under the same model. So that way OE will be able to compare all the different initiatives and say, all right, well, if we move this deadline this way, then that way we will smooth the workload a little bit on our resources. So we just want to acknowledge that there's a lot going on, and thank you for your time today. A little more specifically about Hyperion Planning, the tool and how we selected it. How did we get here? 2004, UCLA went through a rigorous months-long process to select a vendor. They've since implemented CBIG, and they've been using it for 6 or 7 years now. In addition, there are other institutions, complex higher ed institutions who have implemented Hyperion successfully: Michigan, Florida, Missouri, Stanford, Harvard, Dartmouth. I firsthand worked on the Harvard project for their budgeting system implementation. So I've seen this tool work successfully in a complex, decentralized environment, which I've learned over the past few months. Berkeley is right up there with all of them. But the tool, it can be very successful, I think, for budgeting at universities. In terms of approach, there's kind of two approaches that we're seeing. One is the UCLA approach. They did a more centralized implementation of their central budget office. And Harvard, on the other end, they did a decentralized implementation. So they went out, met with all the units, worked with the units to gather requirements, and really had them as a primary stakeholder in the process. And to attest to Berkeley's method of which one are we going with, Berkeley is choosing the Harvard method. Kathy Lloyd actually was on that project as well, so our project manager has seen firsthand how it will work in a decentralized fashion. So, question?
So did UCLA, after the initial implementation of the more centralized version, have they rolled it out to a more decentralized reporting?
So to the best of my knowledge, they haven't done a broad rollout that we're planning to do. Sure. The question was, has UCLA done a broader rollout since 2004? And generally, from what I'm gathering, they haven't done a significant rollout through the whole campus that we're planning here. Another question?
Can you tell me why?
I do not know specifically why.
The culture of the campus?
The question is, why has UCLA not done that? I'm not sure the answer to specifically why they have not.
Has anyone asked?
I'm not positive.
Has anyone drilled down to find out why they haven't rolled it out?
Kathy?
Yeah, that's not super rich. Oh, okay. I'll move up to the front. So as far as drilling into what UCLA has done, we have talked to them about and worked with them actually quite directly. I actually knew Glenn Davies before, when we were doing the requirements gathering at Harvard, when we decided to purchase planning. And my understanding is that they originally pulled it together to do reporting and analysis at the central level. And so they use it for their data collection. So the folks who are the central finance officers for the various schools and units on campus, those are the people who are currently sending out like the sources and uses and submitting that to the budget office. I believe that is the group that is pushing it up.
So when you say the central budget office, it's actually a central budget office plus all of the control points within the
Correct, correct. The Harvard model, on the other hand, at UCLA they have not implemented employee-level budgeting, employee-level detail. So at Harvard we did both. We did summary-level budgeting, in other words, at the costing string level, but we additionally allowed for more detailed buildup of the compensation accounts using a second application that allowed us to build up that detail and then pushed the results over into the summary budgeting. So that is our objective here as well. So I honestly don't know how to implement a central-only system. I have no experience in that. My only experience is gathering requirements from everyone and finding the right solution for all levels of the campus.
I think my only fear is that by decentralizing it, the resources are now strained, and so you're asking people who probably aren't at the level to do the budget planning. They're not trained, meaning not just to go to class, but they don't have the background. And so their resources are strained. They're not asking to do stuff that they're not qualified to do. And once again, it's the decentralization is freeing up resources that were once held centrally, meaning the work.
So let me see if I can test an assumption that I have with you guys in this room. So what I heard when I went out and did different chats with folks was that a lot of the department managers were spending a lot of time managing things in spreadsheets because they didn't have any way. I mean, they're looking at their budgets in spreadsheets, they're building them up in spreadsheets, and then they're loading things through journals into the budget ledgers, and that is a ton of work. And and then trying to report back out on it is also fraught because you have to, in order to compare years and things like that, you have to run separate reports and dump it all into. So the tool facilitates many things. Reporting is one of them. And you can build reports that are at that sort of department level that really help people kind of with that piece of it in terms of comparing things and doing analysis. And then the automation of the spreadsheets that they're already doing is something that helps because then they don't additionally have to load the data into the ledger to make that piece link up. So this project has not been presented as a cost savings measure necessarily. It's an efficiency gain and a redeployment of resources towards more value-added activities. So we're hoping that that is the case. As far as recognizing that prior slide with the puzzle pieces and how incompletely overwhelmed people are with the amount of work that's coming down both from OE and from the results of organizational simplification where there were massive layoffs and things like that. I have been talking very directly with the OE office about finding a way to supplement resources on campus to assist with all of these projects because that has been uniformly a response that we've had from the local implementation managers. So what I've found in my short time here is that you can have really great ideas like that kind of, but it does help to have some of the infrastructure in place to support that. So that's taking us a little bit more time than we would hope. So what I've been asking folks to do is to tell us where and what kind of help and support you need so that we can best configure it so that so we know what will help. That was a long answer.
When you say all funds budget, will it be extended to extramural funds?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, will we be extending to extramural funds budgeting? Do we have a slide for that later on?
We do not in this presentation.
Oh, okay. So when we did the evaluation, the scoping for this initial project, and this is true at my last project too, the nature of contracts and grants budgeting is slightly different than, and I know I'm not telling you something you don't already know, the years don't align with the fiscal budgeting, there's a lot of granularity to it, and there's a lot of linkages with other source systems, et cetera, that make that very complex. So what we agreed to do was to hold off award-based budgeting until a future phase once we've got the foundation in place, because we need to get this foundation in place. The chart of accounts loads into the tool, people trained, people up to date on the new process that we're going to be going through. So we agreed that we would hold that until after. However, the reporting tool that we're deploying and the reporting engine, we're going to pull in all the data for contracts and grants or every fund, all the values, et cetera, which enables us to do some very interesting and fun things with reporting. And so one of the first reports that we're going to be releasing in September is a 12-month report that shows the inception to date balances of, you can use for contracts and grant award, and you can see across whatever 12-month period you want to look at, and then what the remaining total is. So hopefully that will start to illustrate to the folks who are anxious to have an improvement in the contracts and grants budgeting world that the capabilities of what this can do.
Can you give us a flavor as to how this will work university-wide? Are similar initiatives underway as generated by the Office of the President? And then maybe part two is, what is UCSF doing? Since Berkeley is working more closely with UCSF on many topics and issues.
I'm going to see if I can restate that. That was very long. I think what you're asking is, how are we integrating with other campuses and the UC?
Is there a university-wide initiative of which this is a part?
There is not necessarily a university-wide initiative for this particular technology. However, I can tell you that the Office of the President is implementing it right now. I think they're in user acceptance testing. And they're tightly linked with UCLA's model. And UCSF has recently had, they're working through some evaluation of what they could do with it. So yes, there is a lot of energy around this. I think Davis might even be thinking about it. John?
So there's regular conversations trying to see how much partnership can go on between the tool. Most of what stops us, and this is with most systems, is the chart of accounts is different at each place, so that usually you end up putting in a separate instance of the same application, which is not as efficient as a single instance that's managed and upgraded at the same time. So it's a goal, and people are having these conversations to figure out how we can start to converge on a more singular chart of accounts. So it's definitely there, but Berkeley has decided not to wait because we feel that it's going to be so beneficial for the entire organization to keep moving forward, but staying in constant conversation with UCLA, with UCSF, with UCOP, trying to converge on a system-wide.
Any other questions for me, or can I hand it back to my fearless cohort?
All right. We'll keep heading through the presentation. So to bring us back to here, this slide shows the budget process at Berkeley and a little bit about Hyperion planning and how it addresses some of the needs at each of those steps in the process. So if we read it like a clock and start kind of at 1 or 2 o'clock, the process typically starts with creating some planning and budgeting assumptions. This may be created at a central level, or it may be created at the units. What the tool allows you to do is pre-populate some of those items. So as you think about your versions of spreadsheets, you can put the data point in one time. So benefits percentage, for example, you put that in once, and it will use that percentage for any calculations that we're doing in the tool. In terms of the preparation of budget templates, as we set up each user and what security access they should have, if I'm a department manager for 3 departments, I'll have access to those 3 departments instead of creating my own specific kind of spoon-fed spreadsheet. Local budget completion, as we move into that step, typically there's a workflow process. So as a department manager, I create a template and I pass it to my manager for review. There's an opportunity to automate and kind of understand where you are in the process for all your departments via the tool. As we move into the consolidation, we've talked about this a fair bit already, but it allows instant consolidation at any point throughout the budget process. So as I met with units, they said, yeah, we consolidate about 1 time during the budget process because it's so much work. This allows you to consolidate anytime you want, as you can run the report at any level of the organization and see where you stand at that point in time. Next, we typically consolidate the budget at the university level, so similar situation. You can review your budget at any time. And then lastly, the analyze, monitor, report, and forecast. So the reports in here are very flexible. The actuals versus budget reports, I think, will be very useful and enable variance reporting to be deployed more fully across the university. Yes. So there was a recent version that was just released, and for the process management, I don't think it's included, but it's possible it's on the roadmap for a soon-to-be-released version. Okay. So this slide I'll spend a fair bit of time on. I think it's very important to understand what is the landscape of major financial systems at Berkeley and how is it going to change based on CalPlanning. So the first one is the BFS, Berkeley Financial System. I'm sure you all live and breathe BFS. It's also known as PeopleSoft Financials from the vendor. The current state purpose, the system of record for budget and financial transactions. The future state is just the system of record for financial transactions. The budget ledger, we assume, will be subsumed by CalPlanning. And then how does it integrate with CalPlanning? BFS will be the source for CalPlanning. So the chart of accounts that exists, the trees, the hierarchies will be brought into CalPlanning. So if you think about you're going to do a department reorganization, you'll set up BFS with your new hierarchy. That will be fed into CalPlanning. So those will be in sync. The next system is HCM, Human Capital Management, PeopleSoft HR. It's the system of record for HR transactions currently. In the future state, we expect to continue to play that role as the system of record, but also have positions. So currently at Berkeley, some people have positions and some people do not, depending on how their funding is set up. We expect in the future state, all employees that are full-time will have a position and it will be stored in HCM. We'll then source those positions into the budget tool. So you can see what your current state is, and then you can plan for your future state. The next one is BEARS. Hyperion Interactive Reporting is the name of the tool. Not to be confused with Hyperion Planning. They're from the same vendor, but two different tools that they offer. So BEARS is your financial BFS and HR, HCM reporting. It's updated daily, and it has the journal transactions and details in there. In the future state, it's going to stay the same. It's not going away. We're not making changes to it. It's going to continue in that realm. The only integration right now is in a future release, it'll be the same portal. Since they're both sold by Hyperion, you'll log into the same portal, and your CalPlanning reports and your BEARS reports will all be available through that same kind of view. Unfortunately, that's not quite released yet, so as we get to the end of the project, I think it'll be available by then. I saw some smiles and then sad faces. Shadow systems offline, so this is kind of the current tool primarily used for creating your budget, your consolidation, any kind of ad hoc reporting you may be doing. In the future state, it may supplement if there's something that isn't available in CalPlanning. You may want to still use shadow systems. But the main idea here is moving as much of this as possible into CalPlanning and automating and trying to improve the processes for the budget creation and reporting. So lastly, we have CalPlanning. It's actually called Hyperion Planning. The reporting tools are called Financial Reporting Studio, and SmartView is the ad hoc query tool. So that's actually a tool you can use through Excel. Extremely flexible, very cool. We demoed it yesterday at our all limbs meeting, and we had lots of oohs and ahs, and I think that's what we normally hear about it. So I think you'll like the flexibility you get with SmartView. I'll pause and see questions.
Yeah, I just have a question in regards to HCM and the integration. We're now having to budget for vacation leave accruals. Will that be part of this system?
So as we'll get to the timeline at the end, the employee budgeting is phase 3 and scheduled for a go live in December 2012. And we have not investigated that quite yet, but I'm sure we will look into and see how we will budget for the vacation accruals. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. In terms of measuring success, we kind of live and breathe the ability to measure success. You'll see that today. You have a feedback survey that we hope you'll fill out at the end of the session. But we're trying to gather as much feedback as possible and address questions and requests as best we can. So we just want to explain kind of what we're planning to do throughout CalPlanning to do so. We'll do a baseline assessments. We'll have formal reports after each major phase to see how we did. We'll have ongoing surveys and user groups to try and get feedback. So after we get through the first budget season, we'll bring in some planners, we'll bring in some local financial analysts, managers, et cetera, and really get the feedback from them. How did it work for you? What can we improve for the next year? So we want to gather that feedback and improve the system the best we can. Just an example of that, we had a conference room pilot, which some of you attended back in March. So it was an ability to come in, get your hands on the system, provide feedback for kind of where we're going and see how it works, to touch and feel it. So we had about 26 units attend, 43 responses, and we categorized them into a couple groupings. and had some direct quotes. So we just wanted to share the fact that we're getting feedback. We're trying to use the feedback the best we can to move forward. Next slide. Wanted to show a screenshot of what the tool actually looks like. Since we're talking about a system implementation, we think it's a good thing to show you what will it look like at all. So I'll give you a quick walkthrough. This is a data entry screen that we have. On the left, this is called a task list. It's basically a step-by-step instructions of how do I do my budget. Since you may not do a budget every day, it's not a daily activity, it's a little less frequent, the steps will help guide you of what you should do to create your budget. Click on this form, click on this report, run this calculation to make sure you're doing it in the right order. At the top, in this, we call it the page, there's drop down. So this is where you'd select some of your chart segments, your entity, fund, chart 1, chart 2. And as you select your segments, you're budgeting at that chart string level. You can see in this form we have accounts on the left, we have months across, so you can enter data at each month. In addition, the cells on the left through December are grayed out. So this form is showing you a forecast basically. So 6 months have closed, the gray cells are read only, and then these yellow cells are still open months for that fiscal year, where you can go in and change the estimated budgets for the rest of the year. And so we're going to probably call that forecast in the tool. And that's kind of the quick picture of what a data entry form may look like.
Just to kind of understand that a little better, the grayed out area in the chart is year to date, and what's left is still, so you can make adjustments in the budget for the rest of the year.
Through December, the months have closed. We've brought in the actual data from the ledger so you can see what really happened in those months and then update what you expect to happen for the rest.
Is there a possibility that when, on that yellow thing where you're doing your forecasting, and then the gray, like say, okay, now it's going to be January, and you're going to have gray actual. Is there a way that you'd be able to compare your gray actual to what you actually forecasted on this report?
So yeah, on a report, you'll be able to compare your actuals to what you thought it was going to be before the actuals were brought in. And we'll get into more details. It's called scenario version. There's many versions and scenarios, and the combination of those two is where the data lives. And as we get further down the road, we'll show you how those reports will look. Yep. Any other questions on the data entry screen? Okay. The next screen is the sample 12-month budget to actuals report. So Kathy alluded to this in terms of grants and contracts. So I'll give you a quick walkthrough. I apologize for the small font size on this report. Trying to fit it onto a PowerPoint slide is always a challenge. But really what this report is showing is a rolling 12 months. So right now in BFS and BEARS, it's hard to cross fiscal years and do reports that may have a couple months from one fiscal year and a couple months in the next. This is very easy to do in this tool. So this report shows an original budget here. This is your actuals from many previous years. So if you think of a 3-year grant, for example, this is how much has been spent up to these 12 months. So then these 12 months is how much was actually spent. So you can see this report started in, this is April, or March you can see. So March, these are actuals. And then what does those 12 months equal? And then what are your remaining expenses? So, sorry, this last column is your total expenses. So this total multi-year expense includes several fiscal years, all in this report. And then the last column is your balance. So what do you have left to spend on that 3-year grant?
I have a question on the data entry.
Sure.
Question on the data entry screen.
Sure.
Is there some place that you can keep your forecasting notes, the assumptions that you made for each on a line item basis?
Sure. So for each data point, you can put supporting detail at a specific cell that you can see. Okay. So as we go into future sessions, we'll show you more of a live demo of what the reports look like. The other thing you can do, you can choose at this top in the POV, that red box, you can choose a specific fund, specific chart field 1, chart field 2. So if you want to look at just the combination at that chart string level, you can drill anywhere through the hierarchy. It's very flexible in what it will show you. Any other questions on the data entry screen or the report? Okay. So the next section, talking about the overview of the roles. A little higher level view of how we're structured. We have our sponsors. The project team kind of works with the sponsors. The team also works with a dotted line relationship to the local implementation managers. We'll get into a little more details about what the role is for the LIMS on the next slide. The LIMS report up to the deans, the project sponsors and the deans talk, and then lastly the planners go up to the local implementation manager. So we're really looking for the LIMS to be responsible for kind of spreading the good word across the units, and you guys all got the good word because you've made it here today and someone asked you to come. So the LIMS are doing the job that we've asked them to do. A little more specifically, as we go through this project, it's a long project. We think it's important to explain what the responsibilities and roles of these two areas, the LIMS and the planners, are, so you know what to expect. So in terms of communication for the LIMS, they're the primary contact for the school and college towards the project team. They're going to provide information to the specific planners in their units. In terms of the business process design, as we go through our design work, we're going to work with the LIMS and say, here's the design we're working with, does it work for your unit, and provide feedback from that unit by unit basis. In terms of project management, really making sure they're on target for meeting any deadlines that are coming up. So security, make sure their user list is in and it's verified and these users have the right access in CalPlanning. Training, transition sessions, making sure the planners in each unit are going to the meetings that they should be attending. We also will ask them to track and respond to local issues. So as you're using the system, once we go live, you're in there and you're saying, I don't think this is quite right. You pass that to your LIM and they'll send it over to the project team. So it improves their ability to understand how the system is working and provide the project team with feedback to improve it for future states. And then lastly, the training, the box on the right. Participate in user acceptance testing, so we'll ask the LIMS to come in and really get their hands on the tool before we roll it out to all the planners. They may be leading training sessions, so depending on the size of the school, if it's a large unit or school, the LIMS are likely to be leading the training for that unit. That enables them to provide kind of the business process expertise of that unit in combination with their knowledge of how CalPlanning works. And we find that's the sweet spot for delivering training the best possible way. In terms of the planners, so we have several folks in here. I expect they're more in the planner role. We expect that you'll continue communicating with the LIMS. So if you haven't heard about CalPlanning in a few weeks or months, kind of ask the LIM that's responsible for your unit, what's going on with CalPlanning? Is there anything I need to be doing? Anything I should be staying up to date on? In terms of the business process redesign, as you use the tool, provide feedback to the LIM. This isn't working, this is working, and they'll pass it over to us. As a user, continue to identify any issues you may have. In terms of data integrity, as a project team, we're validating all the data is accurate, but we're not experts in your data. So if you see something that you're like, this just isn't right, pass that along, and hopefully it's all correct, obviously. But you're experts in your data, so please let us know if you find anything that happens to be strange looking.
Are you going to be, so your pilot, in other words, this won't go live and then we discover there's a problem with the system?
Well, the goal in any implementation the goal in any implementation is to go live with the correct data and correct and having a full functioning system. Is there going to be pilot testing and? Yeah, so we'll have several testing. We're doing internal testing on the project team. We'll then roll it out before it's live to do testing. And then if anything slips past those testing windows, as it may happen in a system implementation, then we would hope that you report it out as this doesn't seem right. Obviously, we hope there are no issues, but you can't guarantee in a system implementation there will be no issues. Lastly, in terms of training, we want to make sure that the planners are attending training so they're up to date on how the system should be working and they understand the different functions. So there'll be training for each major phase, and we hope you can attend. Any other questions on the roles of the LIM or the planner and what the expectations are? Yes?
So since extramural funds won't be part of this for quite some time now, should those in our units who deal entirely with extramural funds be in this planning group right now, or should we include them at a later point?
I do think there'll be benefits in terms of reporting. So not necessarily on the budget side, but on the reporting side, I think there will be benefits. So I think it's worth continuing to attend and stay engaged. And at the point in time where we decide that we want to include grants and extramural funds in the system, you'll already be aware of how it's working, and I think it'll improve that process. Okay. So lastly, the timeline. CalPlanning, when is it happening, and what are the milestones? Phase 0 was the conference room pilot, so that was completed back in March and April. Phase 1 reporting is a soft release, planned to go live in September, just a few weeks away. It's a soft release, so we'll get into a little more details about what that means on the next slide. Phase 2 summary budgeting plans to go live in February 2012. So this summary budgeting includes everything except the employee details. So you won't have the name of the employees or the positions associated with it. That will be in the following Phase 3. And that's scheduled for December 2012. So a bit more details about what's included in each phase. The conference room pilot is really just the proof of concept question.
Sorry.
No problem.
If this initial rollout doesn't include the employee positions, does it include employees in aggregated, like
Yes.
by academic versus staff, and in somewhat finer grains within those major categories?
Yes, so the employees will be budgeted at the account codes that currently exist. So whatever the breakout is there is the summary that you'll have in CalPlanning. The conference room pilot was just the proof of concept. They wanted to get our LIMS a little bit more up to speed and get their hands on the system so they could help us design it a little bit better. We had about 50 folks participate there. The reporting release in September, we're taking the approach of each unit kind of plus one additional user, so the LIMS plus one other person, and that's going to total about 100 users. And what the reporting release has is just actuals data from the past 3 fiscal years. So it enables them to get their hands on SmartView and a few financial reports that we've designed so far. Hopefully they'll get as many kinks out of the system that they may find as possible. So as we do with the broader release, it will be as good as possible. Moving into the summary budgeting phase. So this is really coming up with the new business process for the budgeting. John is working diligently on getting that up to speed as best as he can. And then once he has kind of this future state business process, we'll translate into what does that look like in the system? What do the forms look like? What do the reports look like? And then we'll roll that out in February. And we're expecting about 500 to 700 users across campus for that phase. And then lastly, the employee budgeting phase. So similar process that we're going through for summary budgeting, but then throwing in the details of all the employee names and positions that are out there. We'll continue to do training and provide as much support as we can throughout phases 2 and 3. We expect the user count to be similar between phases 2 and 3, just the additional capabilities of the employee detailed budgeting. Any questions on the phases, scope, timeline? Okay. All right, wrapping up with the next steps. So hopefully you all picked up a survey on the way in for today's session. We'd love to get your feedback and hear what was valuable and what you'd like to see in the future sessions. Feel free to go to the websites if you haven't so far. We'll post these sessions out there. As you can see, we're recording today, so we'll have this video posted to the web as well. So if you have colleagues who couldn't make the session or the previous one and still want to have them see the presentation, they're able to watch. Continue to communicate with your LIMS, so make sure they're being engaged and make sure you're engaged as best you can to understand what's going on with CalPlanning. And as the project team, we'll schedule the upcoming transition sessions and build the content. Question?
May I ask just one detailed question?
Sure.
Maybe too premature to ask the question, but I understand that you build the budget for a discrete period of time and you start from the individual position levels and the individual line items in building the budget. Will the tool allow for individual fund management as well? In other words, will it reach into BFS, pull beginning of period fund balances and show end of period fund balances as part of the tool?
Yes, it will do that. In terms of reporting, all the fund balances will be in there. In terms of budgeting, selected fund balances will be in there. So we're currently working through the process of which funds do we expect should be used for budgeting versus reporting in your actual transactions. So in terms of best practices, if you have a fund with a small amount of dollars, you don't typically want to budget that, but you want to find your big buckets or categories for budgeting those funds. And we're working through what that looks like as we speak.
That we use for our budgeting process of our funds. So
perfect. Great. Lastly, I'll just kind of show you what's in the appendix. There's a few more slides, some contact information if you have further questions for Eileen or myself or Kathy. Quick vocabulary page. So as we get into future sessions, we'll go through this in a little more detail of the phases we talked about today on the right-hand side, some terminology. If you want to review it and get ahead a little bit, you can review those. And then lastly, the list of all the local implementation managers across campus. So you can see who the LIM is for your specific unit if you're not sure who it is. And that's the whole presentation for today. If you have any further questions, happy to answer them, Kathy or John or myself. Yes.
Well, I'm kind of disappointed. I thought we'd get to see this presentation that you've been talking about, this SMART thing.
The SMART view.
Yeah, I mean, you showed it
session.
yesterday, right? People were wowed.
People were wowed yesterday. This is really intended to be an introductory, high-level presentation to kind of set the stage for our future transition sessions, and we're definitely planning to show that soon.